Great. We're very pleased to have Congressman Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And for this session, which we've titled Winning the War on Terror, but I'm sure they'll touch on a variety of other issues, we have Tom Gjelten from National Public Radio to moderate the conversation with Chairman Rogers. So I'll turn it over to Tom to get us started.
Great. Thanks very much, Jamie. Can everybody hear us okay? I think so. Good. Well, it is an honor for me to be here with Congressman Mike Rogers, who brings to his position of leadership on the Intelligence Committee vast national security experience, both in the FBI and the military. And he has, as you all know, he's familiar with a lot of issues pertaining to terrorism, ranging from the prospect of biological and chemical attacks to what's going on with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in the area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and most especially and recently with cyber issues, which I'm sure that you're mostly focused on traditional cybersecurity, but there is a kind of a danger of terror attacks involving cyber capabilities, which maybe we can get to later. But let's start with the issue that everybody wants to start with naturally when you're talking about the war on terror, and that's the status of the fight against Al-Qaeda. Leon Panetta and other administration officials have repeatedly said that Al-Qaeda is nearing strategic defeat owing to the number of Al-Qaeda leaders who have been taken off the battlefield as a result of the drone strikes of the last several years. Is that your sense as well?
Well, we certainly put a hurt on them, no doubt about it. And we have the command structure, the way that they finance, train, that leadership cadre has really been knocked off its feet. But the one thing I would be very cautious about is that I've heard them described in the media as fracture groups of Al-Qaeda. These really aren't fracture groups. These were groups that were drawn to Al-Qaeda. So AQAP in the Arabian Peninsula and the Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb are very solid organizations that have good leadership in their terms and functionaries that can still conduct and pull off attacks and finance are still alive and well. So we may have hurt the leadership very significantly. We continue to put them on their heels. We make it difficult for them to plan operations, but there still are these groups dedicated to the Al-Qaeda mission that still pose a very serious threat. So this is not the time I would think to back off. My argument is time to step on the gas and see if we can't break their back for good.
Well, what's the difference between Al-Qaeda, what they sometimes call Al-Qaeda core, which I think is generally taken to mean the leadership that was in that border area between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and these splinter groups, or whatever you want to call them, is the danger, the threat, sort of different, whether you're talking about Al-Qaeda core or these other groups?
I think you're going to see mission changes. Zawahiri had always been promoting that they should hold some territory. So he argued if we are really preaching for the true Al-Qaeda message, which is the return of the caliphate, then we need to hold ground in order to get there. Now that was always dismissed because of the sheer difficulties of holding ground and the logistics that go into it, the manpower and money. So I think Osama bin Laden always backed off of that notion, saying that that wasn't necessarily their job. Their job was to create the environment for those things to happen. Well, we can see a little bit of that shift, and if you look at Yemen, you can see that shift. This is the first place that I believe that they're looking to hold ground. The south of Yemen, they actually hold territory. So Al-Qaeda still today is holding territory in Yemen, and I think that is the kind of change you'll see moving forward, because you're going to have different voices in leadership at the table, if you will.
What about Al-Shabaab? You didn't mention Al-Shabaab. They've then kicked out of Mogadishu, of course. So is it getting harder for them to have a kind of an operational base in Somalia? What's the latest on Al-Shabaab?
Well, outside of about 8 blocks in Mogadishu, there's not much control in Mogadishu, and some speculate that 8 blocks may be not all that tough. It is an organization that poses real risk. It poses the ability to conduct operations outside of Somalia. So anytime you get a functioning group that can do that, it's an issue. Now they have had dialogue. Matter of fact, the most recent and most public discussion of that was a gentleman named Warsame, who was taken into U.S. custody whose sole job it was, even at his tender young age of 25 years old, was to establish the links between Al-Qaeda, AQAP specifically, and Somalia. And what we found in that those transactions were that they were taking training on how to conduct operations, how to do finance operations, how to train bomb makers and move bomb makers into places where they're safe but still can have an impact. So all of that was still going on, and this was all subsequent to the Osama bin Laden raid. And so it just shows you that this is a vibrant group. I was a former FBI guy. Right. I worked organized crime for a lot of years in Chicago. And when you look at taking out the leadership, organized crime has a funny way of finding 1,000 replacements. There's a lot of similarities between Al-Qaeda and that. Now what would happen is, and this is why they say a strategic defeat, you recruit younger, more impatient, less experienced people into positions of leadership. They're going to make a mistake. We're going to be on them a little quicker. So that's the benefit to us. But some notion that it's just going to go away overnight, I think, is
well,
not realistic.
Let me ask you what you think of this counterterrorism strategy that is so focused on drone strikes. Does that make sense to you, or would you prefer to see a different approach to counterterrorism?
Well, airstrikes are a tool in the campaign. They are not the sole function of what happens in targeting these particular groups. And I argue you have to have all of your horses in the race all at the same time. And I think a lot of people want to focus on it. I think airstrikes have been the single most disrupting activity on Al-Qaeda that we have seen to date. However, that being said, there's lots of other places we're putting pressure on them, and you have to do it all at the same time. If you just did airstrikes, that in and of itself would not do it. You have to do airstrikes, you have to do pressure on their financial networks, their ability to move people, weapons, all of that has to happen all at the same time. And every country is going to be different. So some notion that people say, well, this works here, we can just pick that up and transport it someplace else and it'll have the same result, I think is naive and doesn't understand the complexity of the counterterrorism battlefield.
But you said at the beginning that you think Al-Qaeda's missions have evolved, sort of the mission patterns have changed. Do you see less of a threat to the U.S. homeland, for example, less of a threat of the really devastating kind of attacks, perhaps involving even chemical or biological or dirty bomb? Is that what you mean when you say that the mission focus has changed of Al-Qaeda? Has it become more, local, regional perhaps? Or?
No, and I will tell you, Libya was a great example. We know that Al-Qaeda had raised their level of interest and communication about obtaining weapons of mass destruction from Libya. We know that is for sure and a for certain fact.
What time period are you talking about?
During the chaotic period of the transition here.
Really?
And it's something that they were very interested in trying to capitalize on. But we saw other groups doing it as well. It wasn't just Al-Qaeda. Other groups were very interested in trying to get their hands and to try to take advantage of the chaos on the ground of securing what the world knows was weapons of mass destruction, stockpiles, and other types of weapon systems there in the country. So we know that was happening. When I say it's changed, the core group, the old guard, is certainly getting smaller. And so their discipline will change. So the discipline of the organization will change. They were very good disciplinarians in the organization of Al-Qaeda. I think that part will change. They still have a strong interest in finding dirty bombs or other chemical weapons, biological weapons. They state that frequently, and through all source collection, we know that to be a fact. So that type of thing is still ongoing. They're going to look for that spectacular event, and it is always the most dangerous right before the lights go out. Yeah. Because they're going to grasp for anything that makes a big statement. So we're concerned about that, and that's why we spend so much time and attention on it.
Now we know that there were some Islamist thinkers in the opposition in Libya. Was Al-Qaeda able to make any progress in getting access to any of those materials? Were they able to take advantage or use any of these, Islamist figures in the opposition to kind of get access?
Well, there was several different layers of concern in Libya. One is the surface-to-air missiles, the portable, they're called man-pads. Very, very concerning just for the sheer number of them. There were chemical stockpiles that were well known to the world, and then there were stockpiles not well known to the world, even to us, after we had become partners is a strong word in Libya, but at least associates again.
Yeah.
And so we knew that they were trying to get their hands on. The good news is the United States had pretty good visual acuity of where those things were from the WMD perspective.
Yeah.
And worked pretty hard to make sure that that stuff didn't walk away. It's imperfect at best, but I don't think anyone can say for certainty that some weapon systems did not fall in the right hands. I happen to believe Mike Rogers, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, we're in pretty good shape there. But you can't say for certain and for sure because we just didn't know about all of it. So we don't know what we don't know. That's the one thing that we continue to.
Do you have similar concerns about Pakistan, about the security of some of the materials and weapons there?
I do, but for a whole different set of reasons.
Yeah.
You know, I always have said that Pakistan is an army with a country, not a country with an army. As a matter of fact, of all the difficulties and all the time I've been traveling there, I've really never met with a civilian elected government to solve a problem. It was always through the Army and the ISI or their intelligence services. That tells you a lot, I think, where the power is in that particular country. And they see it as two different issues. And it's hard for us to understand that their nuclear security issues they see as a very different from their counterterrorism efforts and issues that they have in their own country. Mm-hmm. That's been very difficult and frustrating for us because we keep trying to merge these two issues, that you've got to have better security on your nuclear weapons. By the way, they're going to go from number 5 in the world to number 4, we believe, in a pretty short order here. So this is a country that is investing in its nuclear weapons capability and program. And
in terms of the number of warheads they have, or what do you mean?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. They're going to continue to build that program. And again, they don't look at the CT problem as their number 1 problem. They look at India as their number 1 problem. And it is a hard thing to shake them out of.
Well, Chairman, I'm sure that people here are going to have a lot more questions about Libya and Pakistan, but I do want to cover a couple of other issues before we open it up. Something in the news right today is the future of U.S. detention policy. Now, there were some real serious administration concerns, White House concerns, about the detention measures in the Defense Authorization Bill that cleared the Senate. Now, I understand that, I think the administration was concerned about the requirements that suspects, al-Qaeda suspects, be put in military custody, and there was concern, and I'm sure you understand this as a former FBI guy, that might sort of close off some options for civilian law enforcement and FBI investigations. How was that compromise worked out in the conference committee, and is it going to address the White House concerns such that they're not going to be threatening a veto on it?
I joined the White House concerns late last week as a member of the conference committee on the Defense Authorization Bill. I think for different reasons. I was worried about the operational tempo. Mm-hmm. When the last thing you want to do is interfere with the operational tempo at the pointy end of whatever event that is. So I'm from Michigan. I use the Detroit bomber as an example, or Christmas Day bomber. You don't want the FBI treating it completely as a criminal case when that person got yanked off the plane.
Right.
For a whole set of obvious reasons. We didn't know who else was up in the air. You want to treat it as an intelligence-based investigation. Mm-hmm. So we beat on the FBI, me personally, pretty hard about saying Miranda rights under those circumstances is not the best way to conduct this because you've got to get the actionable intelligence first.
Right.
Trust me, even I could have prosecuted that case, I think. We had plenty of witnesses.
Yeah.
You can come back afterward and get all the criminal evidence you need to put him in jail.
It's not all tainted.
Yeah, no, it's not tainted. You have a whole plane full of witnesses that watch this thing unfold. So what you wanted to do is try to protect the intelligence front end of it. So I opposed the language as I saw it before and joined the administration on that because it would have impacted that first set of interviews. And the one thing, if you want rapport building in intelligence gathering for interrogation, it takes time. And the tempo of that will change with every single case that you engage yourself in. Mm-hmm. Some will be quick, some will be longer, some will take on again, off again kind of relationship building. And what this did is it required an automatic arrangement to transfer to military custody,
right,
and or you had to get the Department of Defense to go through a process to say that you didn't. So you would lose that valuable time of interaction with a bad guy trying to interact with Washington, D.C. I thought that was a horrible mistake. So I think the administration and I we disagree with the language, but I think we disagreed for it on different reasons. We're in the process today of working that out, so I can't talk about all the details of that. I think we're in a better place. I think the language is much better. I think the goal of it was to try to get away from a law enforcement-centered approach every single time to reestablish the enemy combatant approach when you have people who are al-Qaeda operatives in the United States trying to commit acts of, I would argue, it's an act of combat, cowardly combat, terrorism, but in a sense of fitting the definition of enemy combatant, it fits.
Yeah. Now, another part of that original Senate language involved involved keeping people at Guantanamo and not authorizing funds to move them to facilities in the United States, right? Can I ask you just generally, what do you think are the lessons that we should have drawn over the last 10 years now about what kind of detention and interrogation policies make sense for this government in fighting the war on terror?
Well, first of all, it's detention models we have today, which is very confused. It's bifurcated. It's very hard. If you're a person down in the field, if you can tell me what the U.S. detention and interrogation policy is, I'd like to meet that particular individual. We can't find it, and that's a huge problem. So people are making judgments in the field that probably most of us would think, why would you do that? Because we don't have very clear lanes in the road. And let me back up. You know, one of the things that you want in a facility for enemy combatants is a facility that's hard to get to. Remember, al-Qaeda has around the world more than a dozen times broken into facilities to get people out in very bloody ways in some cases, very surreptitious ways in others. So you have to build a facility that not only tries to keep people in, but you have to try to build a facility that keeps people out. So you want something that's fairly remote, that is not disruptive, and you have to have specially trained guards to handle this very unique set of dangerous individuals. You have all of those requirements. So I can't think of a better place to build a facility that fits that than put it on an island that's very difficult to get to, where you have trained personnel in this particular event, and that unfortunately or fortunately is called Guantanamo Bay. So we invested a lot of political capital against ourselves, trying to beat up on a facility that surpasses the treatment of any human rights complaints that we had, which is, I know that's contrary to common belief, but the facility is very well run. Red Cross has said, yes, top-notch facility. They treat them humanely. They pray 3 times a day. They get the right food. Everything that they could possibly want. Now, the fight was, do you bring them to the United States? Well, for the reasons I just cited, it's very, very expensive. Finding that special set of circumstances is pretty ridiculous. So I often said that we should have a very serious conversation with ourselves about what kind of facility, if you're going to have a military combatant, they should be in. And I think most Americans would come to the conclusion, don't spend another $300 billion, or $1 million, excuse me, on a facility in the United States when you have one that functions perfectly well. On interrogation, I think we're getting to that right place. I happen to be a rapport building trained FBI agent, so I think rapport building works. I think the president was right in keeping enhanced interrogation as a part of his portfolio. I think anytime you tell the enemy exactly what you will and won't do, you have trained them to defeat your interrogation techniques. Bad idea. So I thought the president was right, even though he campaigned against it, to keep enhanced interrogation as an option, legal option for him on the table.
Okay, one other question I want to ask you, and then we're going to open it up. We're in a time of great fiscal restraint right now. The intelligence community has seen generous appropriations since 9/11, and my understanding is that the community is now looking at probably flat and possibly in the out years even less money. What does the intelligence community need to, how should it approach this kind of new era of budgetary restraint? Are there programs that it needs to take a second look at, or what's your advice to them?
Yeah, well, always identify the problem. I think that's important. So in the 90s, we cut so dramatically, so fast, we thought this is the dividend of the Cold War. You don't need intelligence services. The NSA is too big, too bloated, don't need that. So we went through a whole series of events that I think we paid a heavy price for. At that time, we said, this human intelligence, gathering information from a human being that you recruit in a foreign nation, is really dangerous, it's unseemly, we shouldn't do it, or should do it very rarely. And we really drastically reduced our ability for what's called human collection. Well, after 9/11, we realized we better get back in the business of human collection if you're going to ever stop an event like this. And so that the money that we spent was not just new and created and throwing money at a problem. We had to recreate whole parts of the intelligence business in order to meet the current threat. So I hope we don't make this same mistake and go back and say, well, we're done with this one, we can scale it back down again. Intelligence is going to be the most important tool to getting it right as we move forward, more so than I've ever seen in my time dealing with these issues. So here's the thing, I think the public numbers about tripled the intelligence funding since 9/11, tripled. That's pretty significant. I've never seen technology merge with our human collection ever before like we do today. It's really quite impressive. What things that we could do today weren't even available 5 years ago for folks to do and target people and find the right person at the right place doing the wrong things, if you will. That part is exceptional, and we should protect all of it. And by the way, that's all of the intelligence business that does that. It's not one, it's not the CIA, it's not the NSA, it's not the geo folks, the national geospatial people. It's all of it together, came together for those kinds of things. So what we said is, as chairman, that authorizes the 80-some billion dollars, which is the public number, is that we're going to find efficiencies, right? So anytime you grow that fast, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to grow in places you don't need anymore. So we found in last year's budget, in a bipartisan way, over $1 billion in savings in the intelligence business that did not impact the mission. So we kind of gave it the office. I argue we should get ahead of this problem, not behind it. We did that through merging of IT systems. We're merging the costs of how we get a satellite up into space. Certain sets of training that are very unique have to be by agency, but other forms of training don't have to be by agency, and we can merge some of this training activity. And we got to a pretty healthy savings, and we think there's another round of that, probably won't be to the same amount, that won't cut to the bone, as we say. And we're just going to have to find that money in other places. If you believe, and my argument is this, if we're going to cut the number of carriers that we have from 12 to whatever it is, 10, let's say, then you better have darn good intelligence to know where that carrier ought to be to prevent trouble. Intelligence is only going to be more important, not less important, as every part of the government goes through this cost cutting, and we have to do it, this cost cutting measure.
Good. All right, let's open it up now. We got the chairman here for another 20 minutes or so, so I'm sure a lot of you have questions. You raised your hand first back there, sir. And I think we have microphones. Maybe you should identify yourself. That'd be a good idea.
Randy Page from the Atlantic Council. I'm a military fellow there. Sir, the war on terror is very broad, and a lot of the focus is on the pointy end of the solution. What about addressing the root causes? What can the U.S. government, or should the U.S. government address those root causes? If you look at the Muslim population throughout the world, it's a pretty big problem. If radicalism, is given an opportunity to grow, shouldn't we be doing something about it, maybe more than we are currently? Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we have decided to do is we're through a whole series of different programs across the intelligence community is have better communications with a broader swath of individuals and countries of interest where there might be radicalization problems. As in anything of this nature, there's sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't work at all, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. The good news is I think that we're getting better at this, and we're spending more resources at trying to promote messages that will clearly identify who we are, what our aims are, what our purposes are, to try to tackle that particular problem. I always believed anyway that as long as they understand who we are and what we're about, we're going to have a lot better success. The problem is we're competing against lots and lots of misinformation. And so our trick is how do we do that in a way that A, is effective. And again, we're getting better at it. I'm not saying it's perfect. We're getting better at it. We finally have developed some metrics over the last, I'm going to say 12 to 18 months that I think will start to measure progress in those areas so that we can adjust our messages so that people have a better understanding of who we are in the context of their cultural experience.
Is he Frank?
Thank you. Congressman Frank Gaffney with the Center
Good
for
to see you,
Security
Frank.
Policy. Sort of picking up on this point, I would argue that one of the things that's animating both a violent kind of jihad and a stealthy kind is something called Sharia. And I don't know if that's what you're speaking of in terms of getting this better. I'm anxious about something and just like to hear your take on it. The Department of Homeland Security recently promulgated guidelines about who can train and what can be used to train people in the business of countering violent extremism. And these guidelines, these directives now tell us that the people doing that training have to be vetted by community leaders, by whom it appears they mean basically those who have been, in many cases at least, associated with the Muslim Brotherhood fronts in this country, who adhere to Sharia and are promoting it. Would you comment on whether that's advisable in this kind of war if we have to get to this kind of underlying source of the problem?
I think political correctness it should be taken out of the national security context. You have to have scholarly individuals that can help you understand cultural beliefs. That does not necessarily have to be vetted through what is a political conversation from even those same religious beliefs. As a matter of fact, I argue that's dangerous because they are political in the sense that they'll have people they have to answer to as well when they go back to their communities. And so by using that as the filter of which we use is dangerous. I think it's great that we have scholars that show up, but putting constraints on what can and cannot be said about that particular set of information, I argue, is dangerous. You're going to send misinformed people out to do things that will have only half of the story. Now, we're either hiring some folks that don't intellectually rise to the challenge to understand the difference of both sides of that equation, or we're not. I think we are. And I think if you have that conversation and dialogue with them, we're going to have much better success out in the field versus sending somebody out with half the story. I'll guarantee you that person's going to make a mistake. And I think this is horrible. I think it's politically driven. I think it's a serious mistake. And you'll never get to the end of the problem if you keep throwing some fuel on the fire, if you will. And I'm very, very concerned about these new guidelines. Thanks.
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Ruth Garcia. I would like to get your comments on the situation of the U.S. drone that is now in possession of Iran.
Yes. Oh, look at the time. I know. Gotta go.
Funny thing.
Yeah,
Do you have a vote?
Yeah, I think, did I hear a vote? I just did. Gotta go. Listen, there's any time that folks who have ill intentions toward the United States come into any piece of our technology, be it very low grade or mid grade or high grade, it's not a good day for the United States, I think. The good news is while they're spending time re-engineering, we will be spending time engineering. And that's the biggest difference. And that, it's not a good thing. We wish it couldn't happen, but all of these things are done within the context of risk tolerance. And so, again, I argue they're very proud that they're going to re-engineer this, and I hope they spend 5, 6, 7, 8 years doing that. That would be great, because we'll be long past that by then.
Apparently there's a report today that another drone went down over the Seychelles.
Well, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the report, but we have lost flights before in the past, have gone down in different places. These things are not infallible. Some have human pilots, some have computer pilots. You know, anything that can go wrong will go wrong in these environments. I will say without hesitation that this is not something that anyone had anything to do with coming down with other than a technical problem. So some notion that there's...
Not a cyber attack that brought it down?
I will tell you there was a technical problem that was our problem, nobody else's problem. I think there's a lot of PR going on in that particular event.
You, sir, you.
Oh, I'm surprised they wouldn't give it back, aren't you? Exactly.
Sure. Byron Callen, Capital Alpha Partners. You talked about Libya. I just wonder if you feel the man-pads issue is kind of under control there. And then also talk a bit about Syria and some of the uglier scenarios that could come out of that country. And we see the same problems you saw in Libya.
Yeah. I am less than confident that the man-pad situation is under control. There were just the sheer number, as I have been saying, I have been a broken record on this. I think you know that since the first missile left the first rail. Concerned about this. And you know what we find with these dictators, we learned a lot in Iraq in the sense that dictators don't develop their military for external fighting as much as they develop their military for if something bad happens inside the country, like an overthrow. So the positioning of weapon systems that a logical person with a military background might conclude these are the strategic places you'd want for attack A or attack B or attack C, don't always fit these equations. And so there was a little bit of catch-up in that equation because we, for whatever reason, believed that was the same equation we should use. It just wasn't the case. So the public estimates are there may have been as high as 20,000 of these things. Now, there's some argument about what condition they may or may not be in, all of those things, but I really don't want to find out. I like them all accounted for. We got in late to this particular problem. And here's one of my arguments. I'll get on my soapbox for 30 seconds if you allow me, about confusing boots on the ground with a capability to secure, destroy, or make this stuff safe. Very big difference. And for weeks and months in this town, the debate was, well, boots on the ground is fill in the blank. Right? Nobody was talking about the 101st Airborne Division. But I was clearly talking about special capability units with the sole purpose of rendering these things safe. And because of the broader political debate, and you know, I think I was only one of 8 Republicans that voted for this thing, which didn't make me very popular in the Republican conference, I might add, for at least a week, was because we had to protect our ability to go after these weapon systems. And so what we found was, sure enough, we got into this problem where we couldn't, because of the resolutions and other things, the definition of boots on the ground became more important than I thought it should have been. I think most reasonable people would have said, yeah, if you have some small, special capable unit, please go render that stuff safe. What we know now is other countries are reporting movement of weapon systems and in both Africa and heading east, which is a bit of a problem, some of it through Egypt. I mean, it's still something that keeps me up at night.
Now, are you still talking here about man-pads, or are you talking about some of the more lethal stuff as well?
Well, man-pads specifically, because we got a late start. I do feel that we had a better success rate on the chemical stockpiles.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Yes, sir.
Yes, William Bowles, the Bowles Company. Commercial shipping, handles most goods and that are transported in international, commerce. Recently, over the last year or two, there's been an increase in piracy in the Indian Ocean. What intelligence resources are we bringing to bear on this problem to nip it in the bud so that there's not the disruption to commercial shipping?
Well, history repeats itself. We have Tripoli was our first international engagement of any sort as a young country in 1804, I guess it was, 1803. And part of the reason was the piracy off the coast was so bad, and the Brits and the French and the others were just paying, Spaniards as well, were just paying the terrorists, so they'd seize the ship, they'd pay it, and it became a cottage industry, and they've developed an expertise in how to do it and how to negotiate. It was all very nice, except it was very expensive. And the United States decided we weren't going to negotiate with terrorists, and so we sent our first expedition of Marines ashore to solve the problem, and it really established the right course for a very long time that piracy would not be accepted nor tolerated. Funny, after we did that, the other one said, "Man, maybe we should stop paying." Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. So you look at what's going on now, is that you have people that you should know better, the French, others, the Saudis have paid. The more we engage in paying these folks, the more aggressive they will become and the more expert they will become on this particular trade. Horrible mistake. So we do invest intelligence in this issue. There is some healthy debate amongst what we should do and how our Navy should be engaged in stopping piracy in this region. I would also sit down with some of our friends overseas and deplore them to stop paying terrorists, or you will get more of the same. And what they've done is they've just built those costs on the cost of shipping. So we're all paying for it indirectly. And so we're trying to figure out what the right way is. I will say that I think you'll see some good outcomes in the months ahead on trying to get at the root of the problem, which is piracy and where it's housed and how they finance and all of those things.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Broder from Congressional Reporter.
Hi, Jonathan.
Thank you. You talked before about your concern about the shoulder-held missiles that have gone missing from Libya. I know that at one point, I think last year, Barbara Boxer had a bill that would have required civilian airliners in the United States to get these sort of packages that they could put on their planes that would either send out chaff or some sort of deflecting mechanism. And I know that there's new technology now that includes both chaff and a laser to actually destroy the missile. I'm wondering if there's any legislation afoot on the Hill right now to take another look at the idea of equipping American commercial flights, airliners, with this kind of technology.
Yeah, I never agree that a one-size-fits-all, because that's a huge cost, and then the training, blowing chaff over a highly densely populated area is a lot different, or a laser is very different than in a military combat zone. I mean, there's lots of things we'd have to consider to get there. I argue the best way, the cheapest way, the most effective way is to get on the front end of these problems, which is again why I argue keep a very robust intelligence operational capability in this country. Otherwise, you're going to get a mandate for lasers, and we're going to wonder why, somebody's house is zapped, or they're watching the football game and their dish gets taken out. That's pretty serious stuff on this particular thing. You don't want that to happen. You don't want the NFL commissioner on your knocking on your door, for sure.
Yes, sir.
Ed Ross from E.W. Ross International. I want to ask this question in a way you can answer it. I want to go back to the drone for a minute.
Yeah.
When you make things that fly over enemy territory, you expect from time to time you're going to lose one. Are you satisfied as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee that these things are designed and built so that the technology is protected, that it will, that they built in the anti-tamper stuff? Are you satisfied as the chairman that the kind of things we fly over enemy territory, like these drones, take that into account?
If I'm satisfied as chairman, then you should fire me as chairman. Our job is to ask the hard questions and continue to push the envelope. And I think that we can always make improvement. But remember, some of this is new. Right? I think a lot of people think, well, we had the first drone some 20 years ago. These are perfected instruments. They are not. I am satisfied in this particular case that there is no external force that brought that thing down, much to their promotion and discussion. Do I think we can always do better? And yes, and part of the reason is we have to do better. And it's going to get exponentially faster here on the technological advances. One thing that's saved us and put us in a position to be the most powerful military and the best intelligence services is our technology and the advance that we have on our nearest competitor. Well, anytime that gap gets short, I lay awake at night. So our job is to make sure that that gap doesn't get short, but we continue to have a robust difference, and that includes all the latest technology to make sure that they can't get at it. Remember, just the fact that they're out publicly broadcasting that they have the capability of a cyber attack on one of these aircraft tells you that that's something we probably ought to be worried about. And again, and I'm not saying that in this particular case. I feel very confident of how that thing came down. It was a technical problem, but I worry about what they're bragging about is something that we have to worry about defending against in the future.
Which is the bigger problem, reverse engineering a drone that you happen to get your hands on, or stealing the design in the beginning through cyber espionage?
Both. And we have both of those going on all at the same time. That's the problem. I have never seen, if you look back in history, a nation state who's decided to invest in economic predatory espionage for the sole purpose of competing against an economy to be an economic competitor. I've never seen that before. I don't know if anyone has. Now, I'm the head of the Intelligence Committee. I'd be a little remiss if I stood up here and said, "How spying? Oh my God, how terrible." No, I don't. I think it's a good thing. Right? That's probably why I'm chairman. However, I have never seen a concerted effort to steal our intellectual property, and I will tell you, it is happening at a breathtaking pace. There are 2 companies left that have intellectual property in the United States. Those that have been hacked and know it, and those who have been hacked and don't know it. I have never seen such a prolific event in my life that I do believe damages our national security in a way we don't even fully understand yet, but it is tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years from now that will be damaged severely. So that is a huge, well, I mean, some of the logical conclusions with China, and I would argue China is the most, by volume, wins the prize. The Russians have decided it might not be a bad idea. We're seeing a unique capability come out of Iran now that's very troubling. So on the cyber front, think about what we're facing. We're facing this unprecedented economic espionage, but we used against us. And we have real stories of companies who have lost intellectual property, and those products are now competing directly in the world market against their product. I mean, you don't have to look very far. And there are some great public cases, too, by the way, that I would urge folks to go out and take a look at, because it'll give you a really good idea in a public way how they're doing certain things. Pretty damaging. And then now we're also worried about the ability for nation states to conduct an attack specifically on sectors of our economy. You've all heard the stories, the cyber Pearl Harbor I always hear. I mean, that is unfortunately a real and growing threat. We have all of those things happening all at the same time. So anytime they get technology and allows them to leap ahead, bad idea. I don't care if you steal it or you re-engineer it. Both of them are equally as dangerous to our future.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Helen Anderson. I have a question about the black budget. Where does it fit into the intelligence budget? Is it part of it or is it separate?
Just under the white budget. I'm kidding. I happen to be one that believes that there has to be secrets. Nation states have to have secrets if we're going to have a national security that protects the United States. Funding is an important part of it. And I will tell you, I was one of those that even opposed the top line number becoming public for a whole bunch of reasons I won't discuss in here. But I was overruled on the fact that the top line budget was going to be released, because it tells agencies and gives them, in a nutshell, the ability to decide where we are placing our resources and how we're spending our resources. I always think that's a bad idea. Never tell the enemy anything if you can get away with it. And so the black portion of the budget, I think, is probably well overblown because there are so many of us who go through this line by line, from the intelligence committees and a smaller number from the appropriations committee, to make sure that this money isn't wasted. Matter of fact, that's how we got that $1 billion in savings. We literally went through line by line by line on what is the unclassified, in your term, the black budget. So it is a part of that overall unclassified number. There are some margins that are off of that, but not, I would argue, not significant. But it is very well scrutinized. And again, its purpose is not to not tell Congress what the money is or the American people what the money is. It's so you don't tell the bad guys where we're investing or where we're spending certain national security dollars.
I would like to ask you about, Congressman Hoekstra used to have a kind of a pet peeve when he was in your position or a ranking member of the committee about the lack of oversight by the congressional committees. How is oversight going right now, in your judgment?
Yeah, well, when I first got on as chairman in January, we had not had an authorization budget passed through the Intelligence Committee in 6 years. After a while, you will become irrelevant, which is no way to run this, by the way. I mean, it's just a horrible way to do it because it is such a classified area. They're going to be involved in gray area issues. You need robust oversight. So not only did we get the first one done by April, and I think we had 14 no votes out of in the House, which is highly unusual. We had another very bipartisan bill that will hopefully finish up right after the defense authorization bill again for another one. So we'll be 2 in a row here that we're moving through. And we've instituted a spirit of bipartisanship in the committee. Yes, we can do subpoenas. Yes, you can beat on. I can tell you as an old FBI guy, it's a lot easier to get somebody to want to tell you something than it is beat it out of them. Boy, I can see, wait a minute, let me retract that. Somebody's going to say that Rogers was beating someone for information. Not true. I think it's much better than it used to be. But I also reinstituted quarterly reviews of our covert action, regular quarterly reviews. Our counterintelligence operations have regularly scheduled updates. And these are the major oversight tools that we employ, as well as now that we're in regular order of oversight, all the other things come with it. And so I argue part of it was the committee's function, and now part of it is our ability to get out and reach in these agencies because we are truly authorizers and impact their budgets in a serious way. Amazing how much easier it is to get an answer.
Well, the Congressman has a vote coming up on the Hill. I think we have time for just one more question, and then we're going to have to let him go. Yes, ma'am.
Pam Benson from CNN. There are reports coming out today that Hezbollah has exposed some CIA officers in Lebanon, that they've rounded up some agents. Iran's made some claims. We had a situation in Pakistan where a station chief was exposed, and then the incident in Khost a couple of years ago. Is there a problem at all with the tradecraft that's being used, or is the enemy getting more skilled, or is something else happening here?
Well, our counterintelligence threat is more significant than it has been in the past. Yes, these intelligence services are getting much, much better. I can't say they're on par with the United States, but some are darn close. Some of these intelligence services have been trained either by the Chinese or the Russians, so 2 very, very, very good intelligence services. So the CI threat, that's why I instituted what I did on the committee, is very real and it's getting better, and it means that we have constant tradecraft reviews. We have asked for our own. There are multiple reviews going on as we speak on the tradecraft issues on a whole host of reasons or areas, and events. So that is something we're going to pay close attention to. We're looking at. If anyone says they have the answer, it's X. That somebody probably doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. There are still some questions we have to get answered on the tradecraft issue as we apply into the new modern society. And remember, the internet has changed a lot. It has changed our counterintelligence threat like you wouldn't believe, and that's sometimes hard to believe, but it has just changed the spy business in a way that I've never really seen before. So our tradecraft is as good at handling it as anyone, but at the same time, anytime you have human activity around the world, somebody's going to get caught. That's the unfortunate part of this business. So I don't want people to be led to believe that there's a collapse in tradecraft at the CIA. I don't believe that to be true. But again, we're having separate reviews of tradecraft as it applied, and I'm not speaking specifically to your question, but I'm talking about around the globe on those issues. The one difference I will have with you on the Pakistani issue, the Pakistanis disclosed our chief of base there for political purposes. So there's no confusion about what happened there.
Well, Chairman Rogers, a lot of last-minute stuff going on the Hill, so I'm sure you got to get back there. I do appreciate you taking this time to come over here and talk to us. Very interesting discussion, I'd say.
Well, thank you. Thanks for lowering your standards and having a member of Congress.